Hello, and welcome back to Coffeebreak. My name is Faith Jacobs, and today we're going to be talking about, it's going to be something a little bit different. So I'm here to review a game that I have recently played called The Last Show of Mr. Chardish, and I'm very excited to review this game. This is my first game review, so here we go. An underrated masterpiece, The Last Show of Mr. Chardish. It's not often that I fall in love with a video game's story and concept. Though I have an entire list of games that I adore and keep on a shelf in the back of my mind that have impacted me emotionally or inspired me to further my own art and storytelling, I don't often love every game I've ever played. Not every game will leave an impact or impart wisdom or inspire every player in the same way. And some, more than others, will leave a bad taste in your mouth. However, I can successfully and happily say that The Last Show of Mr. Chardish has left me wanting so much more in the best way. Whereas the few AAA games I have played have left me bored and putting them back on my shelf. Not always the case, but sometimes. This is not the case here. The way I have come to love today's topic of discussion, analysis, and review, The Last Show of Mr. Chardish, reminds me why I adore the indie scene of gaming much more than I ever have the AAA market of video games. First things first, what is The Last Show of Mr. Chardish about, and how did I come to discover the game? The synopsis of the story is this. Decades have passed, and actress Ella returns to the abandoned theater to discover a preserved collection of extraordinary performances. Explore a variety of magical, hand-painted worlds as you collect the lost pieces of the past. However, I believe there is more to this story than the synopsis would suggest. And I'd like to delve into that today on Coffee Break. So how did I find this game? Well, I've found many of the indie games I enjoy via YouTube playthroughs or reviews. And one day, while enjoying a playthrough of an amazing game that I would highly recommend and will probably do a review about at some point called Dragon, the suggested videos below showed me a review of a little demo called Ars Fabulae, hooking me with its unique title and picture of a man in a broken white mask holding his hand out to a woman down upon the floor, looking up upon the man on stage. Instantly I found myself drawn and intrigued. It looked like something out of Phantom of the Opera, and piqued my curiosity further. As I clicked on the video, I was taken into the story of Ella and Robert Chardish. I watched as it unfolded in front of me, this old abandoned theater, seeing it through the eyes of the woman and watching as she puts on an old and cracked pasty white mask. See it from my perspective, says a voice we cannot hear. As the mask goes upon the woman's face, darkness covers the screen and we shift into a beautifully styled but empty stage, save for the man in the mask, a blue suit, and a tie. As he lifts his head and throws a bottle of alcohol out into the empty theater, the concepts in the act called solitude instantly drew me in. Who was this man? And why did he seem so sad? As the spotlight that follows him through an atmosphere straight out of a fairy tale shines upon various faceless individuals of statues, repeating singular phrases over and over again as if they were in a Sanford Meisner-styled exercise. Solitude is one of my favorite levels in the game. Though how I relate to it personally, I'm still mulling over in my mind. There's a lot to process with this game, so for now I'm going to focus more on character analysis. And I'd like to start with Mr. Robert Chardish himself. Who is Mr. Chardish? Robert Chardish is one of two protagonists for the series, the other being Ella, and we'll explore Ella as well. But for now, let's focus on Mr. Chardish. Robert Chardish is said to be a renowned playwright for a small theatre in Linfield, England, according to the game. And for more than 30 years, he's been successful with on-stage escapades, along with his stage partner Ella, who is perhaps even a little more than that to Robert. Mr. Chardish writes fantastical fairy tale-like plays for children and attempts to push the boundaries of limitations with his art. You could even say he's a little reminiscent of J.M. Barrie, the playwright for Peter Pan. In one of these stories, Daydreaming, we can see the tides of his relationship to Ella, how he views himself, his struggles with depression and loneliness, as well as how he hopes his art will change the mundane world he lives in. As we explore the various plays throughout the course of the game, Robert, his shortcomings, his hopes, his flaws, and his entire being shines as brightly as the spotlights which seem to chase him in solitude. Not only showing us the depth of his inner thought life in the most tender and honest of ways, through the uniqueness of each level, but also through the various interview recordings, audio snippets, and music too. What we see through all these things are two versions of Robert. One is the unambitious man who, while so wonderful in many ways, was prone to bouts of feeling like he would never get his head above the water, or the gray that threatened to swallow him whole. And the other is an older and seasoned man who now understands all that he gained but ultimately lost as a result of pushing too hard. It is my belief by the end of his story that he has come to terms and reconciled that he had a hand in the argument that drove so many away, that it was partially his fault. Though Ella wasn't necessarily to blame, and her anger towards him was justified, I think she cared for him too at some point, quite deeply. However, Mr. Chardish knows he was wrong for how things ended, and I believe he even asks for forgiveness by giving Ella the theater. He says it was hers, it was always hers, more so than it ever was his. I believe Mr. Chardish truly loved Ella as much as she adored him, but that'll be a topic for a little later in this episode. Mr. Chardish and his beautifully complicated personality is woven throughout the story in the most subtle and obvious of ways. And I do not think the character has been fully explored or understood to his fullest based on some of the things I have read. I believe the character is written as flawed and very human, but he is much more than simply a bad manager. He is fleshed out through his letters, audio recordings, the drawings and pieces of the past left behind in the abandoned Linfield Theatre, with his thoughts simply and plainly on display. Our protagonist is a multifaceted man who tried and tried and tried to reach for the sky, as shows in the play Ascension. He wanted to climb higher, yet every obstacle seemed to stand in his way, and thus he gave into anger and solitude and pushed away more and more the very people who stood by him, including Ella. As he smashes the statues in front of him, the dialogue seems to suggest that his crusade is his and his alone, and no matter what, he will ascend every obstacle and finally reach that place where he can breathe. And can I just say, my jaw hit the floor when I played Ascension. The entire landscape was a beautiful wave of perfectly chosen colors. It was inviting and open. I was fully in tune with the act of flight that Robert took when he leapt and transformed in Ascension. This game truly has so many incredible layers to it. But of course, the emotions behind the characters and the artistic style aren't the only thing that had me invested and amazed. I was also brought to such a thoughtful place by the music. Beautifully composed by, and I'm going to apologize profusely for I may have possibly mispronouncing your name, Agnieszka Wazali, Once again, my sincerest apologies. Your work is amazing. Isn't truly amazing. I just have a hard time with pronunciation. But I was brought to such a beautiful and thoughtful place by the music. It brings this world to life in such an incredible way. And I would recommend that you listeners look up and listen to the score of this game. It honestly, it moved me. The first time I heard the main theme, the emotions and the things that I felt in it was that of remorse, recollection, longing, a deep, bittersweet memory of a tender past. It has this waltz-like feel to it. I almost want someone to take me by the hands and dance gently to these scores because they just paint the most beautiful yet solemn pictures in my mind and evoke perfectly the feelings that we see in their respective levels. I fell completely in love with the main title score. And the score found in Daydreaming and the finale track as well. Their wonderful composer has found a way to craft the act of a dance in these tracks, in my opinion. And you will truly, truly feel that. So, what we've covered so far? Well, we've talked about Robert Chardish. We've spoken about the emotions here. Let's speak a little bit about Ella McLean, the one whom I will call the music in Robert's artistic heart. The one who shines in a different way to Robert, but she shines all the same. Ella McLean. Our story starts with Ella returning to London and staying in the little hotel where she is contacted by a man named Henry, someone who probably worked closely both with her and Robert back in the old days of the Linfield Theatre. Henry is glad to hear Ella's voice and asks if she'd like him to take her to the gravesite where, as we soon learn, Robert is buried, as it is subtly implied via the tapes of his last interview that Robert was deathly ill and would not survive as he is trying to get his affairs in order, indicating to the player that Mr. Chardish has been gone for quite some time. Now, whether or not he and Ella reconciled, I believe that is up to the player's imagination. But I personally believe, as I stated earlier, that by leaving the theater to her and by what he said in the interview when asked if he could say anything to her, that he tried his best to leave her with something as in an I am sorry for what I did. Now, whether Ella accepts it or not is up to the player as well. And my personal choice was to accept the theater, because I had truly fallen in love with Ella and Robert's story, and I wanted to believe that Ella would honor his memory, having heard all that she had and seen the things through his eyes as the story asks us to understand from his point of view that perhaps the bitterness that had been there in Ella's heart would fade by the end. Perhaps that's why she came to see the theater, why she finds herself crying and laughing at the memories that these things hold. Because deep down, she had forgiven him. Because Ella, much like Robert, is a complicated woman who followed him into the fray and perhaps even wanted more with him. Daydreaming, in my opinion, would suggest so in many ways, both from Robert and Ella. But like all things in life, sometimes our ambitions get in the way, and sometimes we get caught up in dreams, and sometimes those dreams push the people we cherish the most out of our lives. And all that comes to a head in the play titled Anger, where a young musketeer, or if you would like to think of it as a young Robert, is tasked with fighting off angry-looking animals and performing for a crowd only he can see. The spectator is enthusiastic, but also a little bit crude. Will our hero ever earn the Queen's affections, I think he says. The play grows more and more intense as we hear a one-sided argument grow and grow and grow. Ella has nothing to say, but I imagine this was a response to Ella's choice to leave the theater. Robert himself was probably at the point of getting traction for his works, and Ella, not liking the way the publicity was getting invasive and overbearing, as Robert seemed to suggest in his words to her, she thought they should take a break. But Robert pushed and eventually accuses her of wanting to leave him there alone. And sadly, breaking under the weight of his anger and his destructive habits, that is what Ella does. She leaves the theater troupe and pursues movies. And Robert is left alone. And they both follow their own paths separate from each other for a long, long time. I mentioned a little while ago that I thought Ella and Robert were much more, and I believe that comes from the act Daydreaming, mostly where Robert has several lines that seem to allude that he wanted more with Ella, including one where he asks a wishing well if he might spend his days with her, and then proceeds to take her hand as they climb the beanstalk. I think at some point there was a deep love between Ella and Robert based on the context of several points in the game, and I think it's quite obvious that the eventual separation of these characters was harder than if they were just simply friends. The way he accuses her of wanting to leave him and ruin other people's careers, the way he pointed fingers and blamed her, was not simply that of a dear friend, angry that his friend wants to pursue their own goals, but from my view was from somebody who deeply loved the person in front of them and felt as if they were losing that person, in this case Ella, to her own pursuits. Mr. Chardish's flaw, and ultimately Ella's too in this moment, is that they were both ambitious people who shined brightly together, but were immature in how to fix the chasm of difficulty that grew rather fast when Ella wanted to break away from the stale routine and try something new, while Robert wanted to keep chasing the dream that was right at his very fingertips, or at the very least, try and chase it wherever it was leading him. But as is seen, they parted on sad terms, and as far as the player knows, they never spoke again. But even so, I believe Ella either comes to forgive him or forget him by the player's choice. In my case, playing as Ella, I chose to forgive Robert's flaws and his faults by choosing the theater, because that's what I believe it represents. Does she forgive him and start a new chapter in the theater's life to honor Robert, despite all his shortcomings? Or does she choose to stay bitter and throw away the theater's legacy and Robert too? It truly is a question to ponder, and I'll leave you with it on that note. My conclusion. However, while there's so much that I could continue to say about the last show of Mr. Chardish, I'm going to conclude on this note. Every level has something deeper and profoundly moving and touching within it that is simply waiting to be found. Behind the layers of emotion and metaphor, this story is one that will leave you in tears, gasping in awe, amazed at its beauty, and confronted by the struggles of what it truly means to be an artist. I was profoundly moved by the game and the depths of its story, and I can tell you that I am glad I discovered the last show of Mr. Chardish. It's inspired me, and it's left me wanting more. And I know the chapter in the story of Mr. Chardish and Ella has closed, but I really, truly hope the creators keep making more games like this, with stories that are deeply impactful and honest and multi-layered, because I myself am an artist and an actress. I'm an independent creator, and I know both sides of the coin. I know what it's like to feel like Ella. Watching the many Mr. Chardishes that I know seeking their own way in the world of the arts and struggling or wondering if they're enough. And I know what it's like to be in Robert's shoes, wondering if I too can ascend above the things I'm afraid of and bring to life the things I hope for. This game really feels like it was meant for me to play, and it truly brought tears to my eyes and inspiration to my heart, and I really don't think I'll be forgetting it anytime soon. But how would I rate this? For the sake of being someone who enjoys games, how would I rate this? Well, I'm going to give The Last Show of Mr. Chardish a 10 out of 10. Firstly, it was amazing. It was just amazing. Not only in its art direction and its incredible actors, but its incredible writing, its beautiful soundtrack, and a story that has deeply inspired me to create again. I truly believe that the indie world of film and gaming is full of opportunities to inspire its consumers. You just need to be willing to experience the art rather than dismiss it. I think too many times that gamers and critics alike look at the indie world with a simple and crushing thought that ignores everything that I've just written about. That these are walking sims or walking simulators. I know art is subjective. I know it is, but in my opinion, art is not always what the A gaming scene has to offer, and I challenge you to stop basing your view for what makes a game with silly fetch quests and boring, repetitive objectives. I really do. Because sometimes something something as simple as experiencing a multifaceted, multi-layered story that has more complicated layers to its tale than you can imagine is what we need. We don't need another Call of Duty. We don't need another Fortnite. We don't need these things. We need the creators and the companies that are willing to, the little independent companies that say, hey, I have a story. I think it could be told beautifully through the visual medium that is the gaming world. Let's make a Dear Esther. Let's make an Unfinished Swan. Let's make a Journey. Let's make a Flower. Let's make these games like Gone Home. Let's make an Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Let's make these games and let's show what we can do with such an artistic vision. And Mr. Chardish, like every other game that I just mentioned, is exactly one of those. It is truly a story that has so much to offer. So I implore you, do not ignore this title. I would suggest for you to buy it on Steam, on PS4, on Xbox One, on Switch. It's worth every penny. It was worth every penny to me. And if you would be so kind as to follow the Mr. Chardish, the Mr. Chardish social media handles, please do. Please do, because I think they deserve to have a little bit more traction than they have. They've been out for the last 3 years, and they deserve a little bit more traction. It's a game worth your time. So, please do. Please go follow them. Please go purchase the game. Please give them as much support as they can, because it means so much more than you may realize. And of course, one last thing. Art matters. All art matters, no matter where it comes from. And this game, in my opinion, is a work of art truly worth your time. Thank you for listening. I'm Faith Jacobs, and this has been Coffee Break. Signing off.